I'm Ellen Brown, President of the Rotary Club of Harrisburg. We're part of an international community and humanitarian service organization comprised of 1.4 million members in over 44,000 clubs in more than 200 countries. Rotary leads the world in volunteer service. For more than 112 years, the Rotary Club of Harrisburg has organized impactful local service projects that changes lives and creates hope where it's needed most. Please join us at a Rotary luncheon at the Hilton, service on a Monday, or a Rotary alternate meeting to meet our members who are waiting to welcome you. You can find out more about us at hbgrotary.org. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We hope to welcome you as a member soon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brings me real excitement to introduce Church World Service Harrisburg Site Director Alex Swan. Alex and I have known each other through the years from his time at DCED. And actually, I was having a call with Alex and Erica just a few months ago about ways that we can better partner with the chamber and the business community to help them achieve their goals when they're assisting in refugee resettlement. And one of the items I think Erica said was, well, if you know anyone at Rotary, and lo and behold, we do. So before you today, Eric's going to give you an update on their impact, which I think you will be pretty impressed with and surprised at the depth and the growth of here just in Harrisburg alone. Personally, Alex received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Messiah University, where he served as Assistant Director of Human Rights Awareness as part of the Agape Center for Local and Global Engagement. After graduation, Alex served in the Peace Corps as a volunteer for youth in HIV/AIDS capacity building through the Botswana Ministry of Education. Upon returning to the Commonwealth, he joined DCED, that's the State Department of Community and Economic Development, as an Economic Development Analyst. And he's expected to earn a PhD in Organizational Leadership from Eastern University in 2026. No pressure, Alex. They just put it in your bio, so you better do it. Okay. Without further ado, it brings me great excitement and honor to introduce Alex Swan. Alex?
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ryan. Just a quick note about the PhD. It was kind of funny because Erica was the one who did a wonderful job preparing my bio. And in the bio, she had me getting a PhD next year, 2025. And I said, let's push that back 1 year to be a little bit more realistic. So hopefully I do accomplish that by 2026. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to all of you today. Really appreciate it. I know many of you on a personal level, many of you have been involved with the work that we do at Church World Service Harrisburg. So thank you so much for that. So we have a lot to cover, and I know it's a pretty short period of time, so I'm going to dive right into it. So obviously, my name is Alex. I'm the director of CWS Harrisburg. Church World Service is a global organization. We have a presence in over 30 countries around the world. Locally here in the United States, CWS has had a presence in Lancaster since the 1980s. And in early 2022, they expanded into the Harrisburg region, opening up the Harrisburg office. And so we started in March of 2022 is when we officially opened our office doors and started providing services to refugees and immigrants. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit first about a global scale, what's going on with refugees and immigrants more broadly, and then kind of zero into the work that we do at CWS Harrisburg. So as you can see on your screen, as of June 2023, 110 million people were considered displaced. And of those 110, 36.4 million meet the legal definition of a refugee, which we'll cover here in the next slide. To put that into some context, in 2022, it was still very high, but it did even go up a little bit further in 2023. And this is the highest number on record in terms of the estimated number of people that are currently displaced, as well as the total number of refugees in the world. So when we think about refugees, I think it's important here to just take a minute to go over the legal definition of a refugee. Of course, all of us have probably been seeing in the news what's going on more broadly in terms of refugees and immigrants around the world. And so I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to really focus in on refugees and their legal definition, and then we can talk again more specifically about what CWS Harrisburg does. So by definition, refugees are people who flee their country because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on those different topics below, including race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a social group. And they are unable or unwilling to return home because of that fear of persecution upon returning to their home country. And so because of that, they're forced to flee for safety. And in doing so, they have three different options. The first is to flee their country and end up in a neighboring country. Oftentimes when that takes place, they end up in refugee camps when they're first settled into that neighboring country. From there, they could potentially return home to their home country if it's safe to do so. And then a very small total percentage of refugees, right around 1%, have the opportunity to eventually resettle in the third country, such as the United States. And of course, that's what we focus on as CWS Harrisburg, while our colleagues worldwide, especially in the continent of Africa, actually do the processing for refugees before they ultimately come to the United States. So as we think about kind of what's happening at the global stage, an estimated 110 million people currently displaced. Of those, around 36 million are considered legally refugees. And of that 36 million, a tiny percentage of them, again, only around 1%, ultimately are resettled in a third country, such as the United States. In terms of the national impact, each federal fiscal year, the president determines what's called the presidential ceiling of refugees. That is determined on an annual basis. Currently, the ceiling under the current administration is set at 125,000 refugees, as well as 35,000 special immigrant visas, or SIVs. SIVs historically are folks who fought alongside the US military in either Afghanistan or Iraq and have been given that special immigrant status to ultimately resettle and become citizens in the United States. So all in all, it's a very big number. In fact, this is the highest the ceiling has ever been set since 1993. So we really are living in a historical time in refugee resettlement. This is, again, the biggest it's been since 1993, so over 3 decades. So specifically to Church World Service Harrisburg, we are stepping up to meeting this historic moment in refugee resettlement. And I think the numbers kind of speak for themselves. So when we first opened our office again in March of 2022, we were a very small but mighty team. I think for the first several months, we were kind of hovering between 6 to 8 people. And we were, getting out of the community, building connections, working with a variety of churches, faith-based groups, organizations such as yourselves, just to get their name out there that we are here and we are ready to do the work of refugee resettlement. And so in our first year, we ended up welcoming 100 refugees through what's called the Reception and Placement Program. That's traditionally the program by which refugees are resettled in the United States. And in addition to that, of course, March 2022 was kind of the tail end of the fall of Kabul in August of 2021. And so we were also playing a critical role in supporting our Afghan newcomers that were forced to flee from the fall of Kabul and welcoming through a separate program at the time called the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program, or APA for short. So in total, if you combine the refugees that we welcomed and supported, as well as our Afghan neighbors, we ended up welcoming 136 people in our first year of operation. As we moved into 2023, our refugee capacity went up slightly to 110. We also launched our Ukrainian program to support those being forced to flee from the Ukraine war. And we also significantly invested and expanded our integration services. So not actually just the reception of refugees and providing support for 90 days, but building wraparound services to make sure that they're fully supported and ultimately become self-sufficient, either through employment or for our most vulnerable neighbors, we have specialty programs to walk alongside them to ensure they have the long-term support that they need to ultimately to successfully integrate into the community. Then we took a giant step forward in fiscal year 24, which is the current federal fiscal year we are living in, which is due to end on September 30th. We went from 110 in fiscal year 23 all the way up to 567 this current fiscal year, with a few months left to go. To date, we've welcomed right around 350 refugees. So we still have more work to be done these next few months to meet that goal of 567. And this really, again, speaks to the historic moment that we're living in. The current administration is really driving to make sure that we meet that really significant goal of 125,000 refugees and 35,000 special immigrant visas. And so we're doing everything we can here at the local level to make sure we play our part in meeting that goal. And breaking news, just as of last week, we were asked by the federal government to think about our capacity for next year as we look into federal fiscal year 25, effective October 1. Again, in order to meet that goal of 125,000, which every indication it'll be set again at 125,000, we've stepped up here at Harrisburg and have landed on a stated capacity of 935. So we're really excited about that, but we also recognize that it's going to be a lot of work, and we'll talk kind of more broadly about what that might look like next year. Also, just a quick note, there are definitely agencies in this area that have been around a lot longer than we have, who have been doing amazing work in the space of refugee resettlement. But just note that as of right now, CWS Harrisburg is by far the biggest refugee resettlement agency in the Harrisburg area. We are the only agency that has a current capacity to welcome more than 75 refugees per year. So we're really proud of that. And we'll talk again more broadly about the growth of our office and the work that we have done and the work that's yet to be done. So when we think about our numbers and the refugees that we have resettled, this pie chart, hopefully you can kind of read it. I'm sure it's a little bit difficult to read, but this kind of breaks down by population where we're seeing most of our new neighbors arrive from. The big four or five that we welcomed since opening our office, and we continue to see these trends. Number one is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. We've welcomed a significant number of Congolese neighbors, which is not new to this area. Again, those other agencies that have already been in the Harrisburg area also historically have welcomed and supported many Congolese new neighbors. We have also seen a significant population from Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Guatemala, as well as those other countries that are listed there. We've in total seen people come from 24 different countries, but again, those big four, DRC, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and you could probably throw in Guatemala, are by far the biggest populations that we've seen since opening our office. So in terms of the support that we provide at CWS Harrisburg, the first program, as I previously mentioned, is the Reception and Placement Program. That's the traditional refugee resettlement program. So when a new family comes to the Harrisburg office, the first thing we do is greet them at the airport. And then from there, we provide 23 mandated core services that are dictated by the federal government that we have to provide per the contract that we have with the government. Those include everything from finding housing to school enrollment, employment assistance, medical appointments, everything that needs to happen very quickly within that first 90 days to ensure that we're setting the foundation for long-term self-sufficiency and integration into the community. We do this through private-public partnerships. We are very proud of all of the partners in our communities that have stepped up in so many different ways. I could have an entire separate presentation just by that, but really at the end of the day, this work is not possible without the support of the community. And so Erica does a wonderful job alongside the rest of our community engagement team, getting out in the community, having presentations such as this to make sure that we are building that welcoming and inclusive community to properly support our new neighbors until they ultimately become self-sufficient. A quick note, kind of there's maybe some confusion, especially when you see so many different headlines and different immigration categories that are kind of thrown out there, and refugees are ultimately, fortunately, unfortunately, kind of lumped into that same group. And so just, again, a bit of clarification, which I think is really important. Refugees, by their legal definition, are, as soon as they come to the United States, are already on a path towards citizenship. So within their first year, they're granted permanent residency and ultimately given a green card. And then at year 5, they can apply to become US citizens. So another thing that some people don't understand fully is that refugees are eligible to work from day 1. And so obviously that is a big piece of becoming self-sufficient, is finding gainful employment as soon as possible. And we have a wonderful employment team that walks alongside our families to ensure that those that are able to work do work as quickly as possible. So before I get into sort of the longer term programs that we have, again, to provide longer term support to our new neighbors, just piggybacking off the fact that refugees are eligible to work and are expected to work as soon as possible, wanted to briefly highlight some of the economic impact that refugees bring to the United States. So out of an estimated 2.4 million refugees, they've generated a remarkable 39.6 billion in household income, contributed 25 billion in taxes, and represented 68.6 billion in disposable income to stimulate the US economy. Additionally, refugees, in comparison to the national native-born population on a per capita rate, are more likely to open and operate small businesses. This really is often tied to the fact that they have gone through so much in their lives that they have to become entrepreneurial and ultimately to survive and thrive in their new community. And so when we look at the statistics, broadly speaking, on a per capita rate, refugees and immigrants open more small businesses than the native-born population. And we've seen that here in our local communities. We've had a few clients of ours, since we're still in the kind of infant stages of opening a new office. Some of the first families that we welcomed are really starting to get to the point where they can think a little bit more strategically and entrepreneurially about bringing their skills and talents and opening and establishing small businesses here in the greater Harrisburg area. So that's really neat to watch. And I know that some of the families that Catholic Charities has welcomed over the years, Jewish Family Services, International Service Center, they've already seen that. And I'm sure many of you have seen, especially when we think about the wonderful restaurants and different grocery stores that we have here in Harrisburg. A lot of them are owned and operated by refugees and immigrants, which is really, really something to be proud of. So in order to maximize the time that we have with them to set them up for success and self-sufficiency, and then hopefully get to the point where they are thinking, how am I going to give back to this community, whether it is through entrepreneurship or other means, our go-to program is called our matching grant program. So when we receive a family, again, we're mandated to provide support for that first 90 days through the reception and placement program. And then after that, a majority of our families are enrolled in what's called our matching grant program. Our matching grant program is a program that allows us to provide a continuation of support and wraparound services beyond the 90 days up to 240 days or 8 months. In that program, the families are linked both with a case manager to continue normal case management, focusing on things like ESL, school enrollment, housing, those types of really critical services. And then they're also linked with an employment specialist who walks alongside the family, builds job resumes, applies for jobs, and then ultimately helps them get and secure a job. If there are different challenges that are faced, such as English as a second language, transportation, medical issues, our team, alongside our community partners, do our best to troubleshoot those things to ensure that they can find gainful employment as soon as possible. Okay.
How do I use the button?
You're gonna go to the right here.
Okay, cool.
And Erica is gonna pick it up from here.
5-minute whip. Are we ready? I thought it was really important to talk about successful employer partnerships. I will tell you that we have everything from, as you would imagine, entry level to warehouse, but we have communities that are coming here with significant work backgrounds, and they are ready and willing to rebuild their careers. For example, we had a gentleman from Afghanistan that is now working for WellSpan as a pharmacist, and that took 2 years. So we're going to send you these slides, of course. Kind of speaking to what I just said, we have some communities that really don't speak English. They need more time and more support and more programs to get to the point where they can be employed. So we've been asked before by Ryan, what could you all do potentially to help us? We are looking for landlords that are willing to rent to refugees. We do provide a lot of support, including funding to help landlords along those lines. We would love to be connected with businesses that will employ refugees. We are going to have 3 vehicles now to get people to job fairs. And I'll tell you later, we have a fundraiser in November that we're actually partnering with Central PA Food Bank. So Maria could tell you. So we don't just do employment. We also have 2 other programs for the people that are most vulnerable with medical concerns. We have preferred communities, refugee social services. This is a referral program. So they weren't arriving through us. They were referred to us. And so we have a pretty large business doing that as well. Community engagement. This is just kind of a lead up to the fact that we have a really big event on June 22nd. It's our 2nd annual World Refugee Day block party. And it's actually going to be, if you know where the governor's residence is, it's going to be in the parking lot just north of him. And all the activities are free. We've got something like 20 different businesses and partners. But I want to point out as well, we have a women's economic empowerment program, and I think it's important that you all know about that. We have an in-house business coach, and we partner with other organizations that are willing to share mentorship to teach women ways to support themselves. A lot of women want to create items or be caterers in the future, or chefs. We did have an Afghan woman become a chef. She works for Hershey Lodge, so all things are possible. So I just want to point that out. CWS Marketplace is on our website. We're always looking for volunteers. If you all want to wear your business shirts and come to help us with an event, we have not just this one in June, but one in November. And this is the block party. So thank you for giving us the time to talk with you. We're looking for questions.
So I appreciated your definition of what a refugee is, and it made it really clear. But what I don't understand is who decides that classification. So if someone is a refugee or an immigrant is trying to flee their country, maybe for those same reasons, and maybe they're trying to gain, political asylum or something else. So who gets to decide the distinction between someone who is coming into our country as a refugee and someone who is coming in as an immigrant or an illegal immigrant? I don't understand that part of it.
Yeah, great question and really important question. Ultimately, it's decided by the United Nations in terms of who meets this definition. Of course, when we think about the United States and more specifically what's happening at the southern border right now, those people, even though they could very well meet that legal definition of a refugee, the fact that they're physically arriving at the border makes them asylum seekers as opposed to refugees. Refugees first have to go through the process the United Nations has established, everything from documentation of why they had to flee their country in the first place, medical background checks and clearances, cultural orientation, all of these different things until they're ultimately given that legal definition of a refugee. Whereas those that are coming directly to the United States, because they haven't gone through that same process, like you said, could very well fit this definition, but just that slight distinction, which would make them asylum seekers as they're physically showing up to the border instead of being resettled. Yep.
The criteria for becoming a refugee, defined by the United Nations, doesn't include any immigrants who are fleeing because of climate impact in Africa, for instance, where there are devastating famines occurring. How do those folks find a new home?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for it. I will state that this refugee definition is fairly old. It was established in 1951 during the UN Convention for Refugees. And so perhaps it is due time to revisit that and maybe include some of these other categories, such as the one you're describing in terms of the impacts related to climate change. I think legally speaking, someone, for example, in Africa that is forced to flee because of the effects of climate change and maybe they're facing starvation or something like that, even though legally they wouldn't be considered refugees, they would still be provided an opportunity to seek stability in a neighboring country. In terms of what happens next, that's anyone's guess, unfortunately. But yeah, that's a really good point. There, in this broader conversation about refugees and immigrants, there definitely are a lot of gray areas that don't neatly fit into a definition.
Hi, thanks for coming. So in talking to immigrant families, I'm amazed how many know English. What percentage do you sense that come to the Harrisburg area that know English? And then so many of the Nepalis, they say there's 50,000 in South Central PA, so that's Harrisburg, York, Lancaster areas. And their refugee camp story is pretty amazing. So many of them are so grateful to be here. And how many know English percentage, and tell us about the integration into being American.
Yeah. In terms of a percentage, unless Erica has this on the top of her head, I'll say this: there are definitely clear distinctions we see in terms of English proficiency across our different populations that we welcome and support. For example, more often than not, our Congolese neighbors, because the conflict in the DRC has been so long and protracted, a lot of our Congolese neighbors only know refugee camps. And so because of that, there aren't services available to them while they're in refugee camps. If there are, they're very minimal. And oftentimes they do come to the United States with either no English at all or very, very limited English proficiency. When we think about some of the newer conflicts, such as Afghanistan or Syria, the key distinction is a lot of those folks didn't have the experience of living in refugee camps for a long time. And they often had very affluent and professional lives before they became refugees. And so we often see with those populations from the Middle East that they do come with pretty high levels of English proficiency. Your other question about the integration into American culture, we are mandated by the federal government to provide cultural orientation classes. That's something that takes place within their first month of arrival. As you can imagine, we can only do so much with those cultural orientation classes because we also have just a very large volume of people that we're working with, but it covers the basic things that need to be covered in terms of life in the United States. Everything from what you're supposed to do when you hear the national anthem, sort of the norms of schools, jobs, your expectation to show up at a job on time, just the very bare basic things we established with them. Of course, that often isn't enough. You kind of just have to continue to reiterate that, especially if you notice things that aren't quite catching on, right? And just as you build a relationship with them, they really do become your friends, and you build that trust between each other. And then you can have some more specific, honest conversations to ensure that they are set up to succeed and integrate into the United States. But it's an ever ongoing adventure that we partake in. And it's what's really cool and keeps a lot of us going. Obviously, we all believe in what we do and the mission of what we do, but we've seen some really cool things happen years later. For example, Erica pointed out to someone getting a pretty high-level job as a chef in Hershey. We've seen kids graduate from school. We haven't got to the point yet where we've seen any of our clients become U.S. citizens because we've only been around here for 3 years. But some of those bigger picture things, it's neat to know that you played a small part in that process and then ultimately see them years later achieve these big milestones in life.
I was impressed with the slide that showed the market contribution, the economic impact of these individuals. I only wish more people saw that. It might diffuse some of the vitriol about these individuals coming into our country. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll hand that one off to Erica. Thank you for the question.
I'm going to second kind of piggyback off of that question as well. As one of my questions I had for you is what can we do as the Rotary Club or as individuals to kind of further your mission in the community? Because I think that's probably where I see a big gap is that same information that we saw about taxes. that's a myth, I think, that we think, we hear, even as far as people being stuck in their own communities. We see this Nepali Paxton Street, Paxton Dairy Street is a very good example. How do we integrate into their communities, if that makes sense, to make them feel welcome? And what do you do as your organization to kind of help us do that? That makes sense.
Yeah, great question. Erica, do you want to take this one?
So I've spoken at all the other Rotaries in the area, and I appreciate your question. And when I talk to my Rotary, I do speak in terms of any way that you can volunteer, because at the end of the day, they get a lot of things, but the getting help really makes a difference, especially for folks that don't speak English fluently. So whether it's a Zoom practice conversation, if you're familiar with those, we would really value that. English language learning, it gets you to employment at the end of the day. So I would say the gift of your time. There are other ways that you can support us, but that's the most meaningful right off the bat. We may at a certain point also be looking for programs where we're looking for mentors. We are looking to get folks into apprenticeships, because again, it can be difficult to make that connection towards employment. But if we have other ideas, we'll send them to you all along with the PowerPoint. Did that help a little? That's a long question, so.